Okay, we got Dr. Anish Koka here. We're rolling the die a little bit today on YouTube. We're gonna start here talking about a topic that I don't know. It feels like I got a shock collar, Dr. Koka, like a censorship shock collar, talking about this topic. Cardiovascular effects of the BNT162b2 mRNA COVID-19 vaccine in adolescents, and basically this has become known as the Thai myocarditis study. Uh, we're going to go into the details of the study itself on the other platforms because we're live right now on ROKFIN and Rumble as well as YouTube. But why I wanted to get you on is because, of course, like people were sharing this online, and then this happens because this happens every time people share something that is counter narrative to the establishment sort of way of talking about COVID or the vaccines. All the fact checkers come out. So the AP writes that there are posts misrepresenting the study on COVID-19 side effects for teens. And then the Reuters fact check comes out. Fact check, study of Thai teenagers did not find, and I'm not going to read it because I don't want to get suspended. So I see you on Twitter saying that the Thai myocarditis study has been fact-checked by AP and Reuters World. The fact check is missing some important context, which is interesting because that's what they're saying, that it's just missing context when people are tweeting about it. And I said before we went live that I love how the AP and Reuters, like all the fact checkers, they constantly fact check Jim Bob on Twitter, but rarely do they go after each other. You know, oh, MSNBC got this wrong, unless it's like going against their political persuasions of their viewing audience. So maybe we should just start with who are you? Why did you decide to do your fact check of the fact checkers on Twitter?
Well, so I'm a cardiologist. I'm in Philadelphia, and I have been, kind of paying attention to the myocarditis story when it comes to the vaccines for some time. In Philadelphia had a very large outbreak last year. I actually go to a nursing home in Philadelphia, and COVID was really bad. I mean, there was a significant percentage of the patients in the nursing home who ended up in the hospital and were really sick. I mean, so we're pretty excited to have some type of therapeutic to kind of stave off future badness when it came to these waves of COVID that kept coming back. So when the vaccines actually were approved, or whatever the emergency use approval went in the fall of 2020, my clinic was actually, we were one of the few clinics, well, there are many clinics, but I went ahead and applied to get the vaccine and to give it out to folks that were high risk, because as a cardiologist, I give out, we do a lot of stuff in cardiology where we give out aspirin, we give out cholesterol medicines, other type of anticoagulants, rhythm control agents. And when you looked at the original New England Journal of Medicine trial with how protective it seemed that the vaccine was against the original variant, it's like, man, there's not a lot of stuff that I do as a doctor that is going to result in this huge, difference between people that got the vaccine and people who didn't get the vaccine. There's that, there's that famous graph of folks with folks that had symptomatic COVID or not. And so, I have a pretty high risk panel because I'm a cardiologist. A lot of my patients are over 65. A lot of them have heart failure. A lot of them have heart disease, and a variety of other things that go along with that. And so, we applied, we got the vaccine, and started giving it out. And of course, and that was around March of 2021. And there was a lot of concern about giving a vaccine based on a relatively new technology. And you have to go through some type of a consent process when patients come to your clinic and you give them the vaccine. And it was always in the back of my mind, and I think a lot of people's minds, about, well, this is the data we have so far. I hope that this is going to be beneficial to you. Do I know everything at the moment? I don't. And we are going to be accumulating more data as time goes on. And then very early on after that, about 2 months after that or so, after we started giving out the vaccine in the clinic to my patients, these signals started coming out in Israel about myocarditis, which was pretty surprising. Myocarditis is is something where you have actually inflammation and injury of the heart muscle, and you had the signal that was reported from in Israel in late April, of specifically young men having high rates of myocardial injury or myocarditis. And it seemed pretty clear that this wasn't just some random chance appearance, because the nice thing about myocarditis in general is that it's very, very, very rare. Most cardiologists will take care of a handful of patients with myocarditis in their entire careers. But so if you see like a significant jump in something that's very rare, especially given the fact that it seemed to cluster after the second dose, right? So if it was a random event that was happening, you'd have just as many cases happening after the first dose as was after the second dose. But because there were many more cases happening after the second dose, and again, it's a rare condition, it became pretty clear pretty early that the vaccines were likely causing this, which was, and it happened in young men. So very quickly from that point on, as a cardiologist, I got pretty interested in that, and I thought it would make sense to, one, study that further, and two, perhaps take that early signal that was seen in April, and maybe make sure that we were focusing on the high risk folks that were that are very high risk of ending up in critical care units and on ventilators and having bad outcomes from COVID. And it makes sense to kind of do focus on that group when you're talking about vaccination. And while data was emerging about young men, who generally speaking, young men are not very high risk of having bad things happen to them when they get COVID, it made sense to do something with that original with these signals that we were getting. And so, and then it was very frustrating to see from April 2021, now we're sitting, August of 2022, there was really a tremendous amount of dragging of feet related to, vaccines and myocarditis, and, establishing that, yes, this is a link. Now, I think everyone has, agrees that there's a link between vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, and myocarditis. The CDC has said it, the FDA has said it, everyone, acknowledges that. But it took, I think it took a significant amount of time before that was acknowledged in a real way. And the open question, finally getting to your question about, where the Thai myocarditis study comes in, is that given the signal of injury that you're seeing, this is basically, young men primarily, who after their second dose of the vaccine, within 2 or 3 days, it can happen after the first dose too, but more commonly after the second dose, are presenting with chest pain and evidence of myocardial cell injury and cell death or necrosis. Given that that's happening, you want to establish, once it's established that you have a causal connection, then you want to establish, okay, what is the rate of this? Like, how often does this happen? Because you have colleges that are mandating vaccines, mandating boosters. You now want to establish, okay, there's a connection, there's a link we have found. What is the rate of this, so we can figure out what to do moving forward? And one of the studies that the FDA asked Pfizer to do as part of their approval of the vaccine was specifically to look and see how often this was happening in a population by checking certain myocardial cell markers, something called troponins, cardiac markers of injury, to actually check them, in a protocolized way. So, you have people that come in, they get a dose 1 of vaccine. Maybe you check, 48, 72 hours later, you check this marker that you do on a blood test to see, is there cell damage there? You do an EKG at that point. Then you give dose 2, and then 48, 72 hours later, you do an EKG, and you do a blood test again that's looking for myocardial cell damage. And so that was asked for, when the full approval went in. And so, and again, this wasn't, to my knowledge, I don't know where we are in terms of Pfizer doing the study that they were supposed to by the FDA, but out of nowhere, I saw this Thai study come out doing exactly what the FDA wanted Pfizer to do. So I was super, super interested in that. And, I wrote a Substack piece on the results of that Thai study. And the Thai study essentially said that,
Careful.
What's that?
Careful. I guess we're still on YouTube.
Right. The Thai study did, it was 300 kids, age 13 to 18, I think. And they did exactly almost exactly what the FDA wanted. They took folks who got dose 2 of the vaccine, who hadn't had a problem with dose 1, they got dose 2 of the vaccine. And then 24 to 48 hours later, they checked an EKG and they did blood tests, right? And then they did an EKG and blood test, a few times after that as well. And, in this sample of 300 folks, they found that one child had myocarditis. That's what the study showed. And that troponin elevation, the marker of cell death, was around 500. Normal is less than 14. So it's about 40 times above what was normal. And of course, that child presented with the chest pain, and was admitted to the hospital and went to the intensive care unit for, a total of 2 or 3 days, I think, and then came out of the hospital and was doing okay. There were 2 other kids that were found to have, I think, pericarditis, which is inflammation of the lining of the heart. And they spent a few days in the hospital and then came out, and they all did okay. And then there were 4 other kids that did not have any symptoms, but had evidence of cardiac cell damage based on that blood test that I'm talking about. And so that's what the study showed. And so right. And so, it was an interesting study, and it suggested that, this is again suggested. Now, there have been many, many, many data sets since that have showed this, but now again suggested that, this is something that happens, and it may be happening at a rate that is something that, we want to, acknowledge and put into, acknowledge, especially given what we're doing in terms of mandates and when the conversation around mandates and making folks do things, when it comes to vaccines, this should be part of the conversation when you're talking to somebody. So when somebody comes to my clinic, now when a 16, 17-year-old boy comes to my clinic, I don't get too many of those because I'm an adult cardiologist, but whatever, a young man comes to the clinic, this should be part of the, informed consent, where you say, hey, these are some of the risks, of the vaccine. These are the benefits of the vaccine. And then that's how we then come to a decision as to what to do. I mean, we do that all the time. This isn't controversial. When I give aspirin to a patient in the clinic, we talk about the risk of bleeding with aspirin. And hey,
yeah, but you know that this is not normal.
Right.
I mean, this is not a normal, we're not living in like normal medicine or science anymore. So it may seem like we always talk about this stuff with our patients, or we talk about this stuff in research, or we talk about this with each other, but that's just not the world we live in right now.
Yeah, no, it's very strange. And I think that's not science. That's politics and ideology that's kind of, prevailing over just basic science and what doctors have done as part of what good medicine is forever. So I was pretty surprised, when the immediate response to the Thai study was not, oh, good, look, Thailand did the study that the US and Pfizer was supposed to do. Instead, the immediate response was to then, take great lengths to talk about things about the Thai study that were mostly irrelevant, which is what I think the AP and Reuters fact check was. The AP and Reuters fact check was kind of hilarious, in quotes. So this is what they said. So you're not going to get in trouble for this. They said,
oh, no. Au contraire, mon frere. Really? I got suspended once for quoting NBC and CNN, and they suspended me for calling out that they were violating the terms of service and getting away with it. And then instead of ripping their videos off because they were like, oh, thank you, Allison, for flagging this for us, they were violating our terms of service, they suspended me.
I can't even understand. So weird.
It's clown world. So go ahead, please.
So this is what, the AP Reuters fact said. Again, this is quoting from them. In the unpublished, non-peer-reviewed study, only 1 in 301 was confirmed to have myocarditis, a lower figure than is being shared online. And I guess that refers to the fact that like some percentage of, I don't know, someone was sharing the fact that, not me, someone was sharing the fact that there was a lot of abnormal EKGs that were reported. Those EKGs that I talked about as part of the study protocol, and some had low heart rates, which technically means abnormal. Some had high heart rates, which also is technically abnormal. But, especially in young kids, if your heart rate's a little low, your heart rate's a little fast, not really a big deal. But I guess, AP Reuters fact check focused on that as like, oh, that is the major problem here. They're saying that one, the figure that's shared online, it's a lower figure than is being shared online. But I mean, the major issue here is that what they completely avoided talking about is the fact that the CDC estimates, right? This is again the CDC estimate of what the CDC says is the rate of myocarditis. They say the peak myocarditis for is 1 in 13,000. And again, I think the context here is that if your rate of something bad happening is 1 in 13,000, right? The chances that you do a small sample of 200 boys and you find one case of myocarditis in there, that doesn't mean the rate of myocarditis is 1 in 200 boys. I don't think that's the case, because I think we would see I as a cardiologist and as somebody in the community, we would see way more myocarditis. So I don't believe that that's the rate, 1 in 200. But given all the data that's come out since then, I think you may want to be worried about the fact that that rate of 1 in 13,000 that the CDC is saying is not accurate, because and again, Matt Oster, who presented to VRB PAC, is a pediatric cardiologist at Emory. He presents to the vaccine committee basically. He said a similar thing. He said, look, the estimate that the CDC has is based on the VAERS database, and the VAERS database for myocarditis specifically is likely an underestimate. So, I mean, that's the major message that you should get from. That's one of the major points you should get from or one of the major things that should make you a little worried as somebody in the medical community or the wider community, that hey, if you are picking up signals of cardiac injury in a 200 boy database, a 300 kid database, that we should be doing more studies to replicate this, to figure out what the exact rate is. But instead, the AP fact check says is like, oh, in the unpublished study, only 1 in 300 was confirmed of myocarditis. This is a much lower figure than you shared online. I mean, I don't quite understand, why that's the focus. So,
what have you thought, big picture, before we get a little bit more in depth on this? What have you thought as a cardiologist watching this conversation play out in the mainstream media? Like, I think I saw you tweet a meme or a GIF of people just like blind or something looking. You're like, this is the fact checkers, and they're just running around. They can't see what's in front of them. And I'm just curious, big picture, your thoughts, having watched the discussion in the press, since that's my background, over this particular topic, myocarditis, or maybe just cardiac issues in general.
I think they've failed completely when it comes to COVID. I mean, the funny video, there's this hilarious video that people should watch, irrespective of my commentary on it, of some foreign land where they blindfold women and put them in an enclosure, and they put a duck in that enclosure, and the blindfolded women are squatting, and their job is to catch the duck. And all 6 women that are blindfolded are running into each other and can't catch the duck, and it's hilarious. And so I said that this reminded me, because we were talking about this myocarditis thing. This reminded me of science journalists trying to cover a myocarditis study, and it's so true. They've just I think most journalists have failed completely in covering this. I'm not sure exactly why it is. I don't know if it's underlying biases that they have, or is it the fact that or is it the fact that their sources, and I don't know, there's some incestuous relationship between them and sources that are predominantly establishment sources that have their own agenda? I don't quite understand it, but there seems to be a fundamental lack of curiosity that pervades much of the coverage we've seen about COVID. And then also a lack of just intellectual a lack of intellectual curiosity, I think. Meaning they're just so ready to, the job of journalists is not to just hear what an expert says and then just regurgitate it. I mean, people should ask me questions. People should ask other experts questions, right? But here we have somebody who has a credential from some fancy place, and they say that, you know, if they tell you that the sky is green, you don't just turn around and write a headline saying the sky is green. And I understand myocarditis is a little more of a complicated subject than the sky being blue or green, but you have to do your work to kind of look and see. It's like, okay, that's what this person is saying. Let's capture a wider array of opinions, and let me try to figure out, using my common sense and logic and the arguments I'm hearing from various sides, let me try to figure out what truth is. And actually, I mean, I don't know, maybe that's not the job of journalists, is to say what the truth is, but perhaps the job of journalists should at the very least be to acknowledge that there are multiple sides of this issue, right? Instead, journalists seem to be very, very interested in playing along with some establishment ideologues that are very, very interested in saying, this is truth, this is true, this is false. And if you're saying something that's against the establishment narrative, then you are a quack. I mean, that's basically what they've been doing for the last 2 years, which to me is terrible. And I don't think journalists have not, unfortunately, most of them have not represented themselves well.
Okay, this is a screenshot you tweeted about how your account was restored, so you got suspended. What do you think about moving from journalists to the tech gurus here? Their role in how we're all fighting with each other over the dinner table, on these topics with terrible information, not just from mainstream media, but also because we can't see certain things online. Like this video, I don't even know if our video is going to survive on YouTube, so we'll see. But but yeah, tell me what it's like been, being a cardiologist on Twitter.
Yeah, so this was interesting. I was suspended for I was suspended wrongly, apparently. Twitter said we reviewed it, this is wrong, we're sorry, you have been restored. But all I did was share another cardiologist's review. There's a cardiologist named Sanjay Verma who wrote a long Medium post on rates of vaccine myocarditis. And he went through, he spent, I don't know, 8,000, 9,000 words going through a bunch of different data and what the rates of myocarditis are. And then, the part that I haven't actually done in writing, because, I have a full-time job that doesn't involve myocarditis and vaccines. But then he went on to talk about, in the last part of it, about his opinion about, whether or not vaccinations should go on for, the high-risk vaccine myocarditis subgroup. And so he gave an opinion there. I'm not going to say what the opinion is here to keep your channel alive.
Thanks. But we can talk about it in a second.
So literally all I said in the tweet was another cardiologist does an exhaustive review of myocarditis rates, and I linked to his article. And I guess I have no idea how it happened, but that got me suspended. I didn't even say that I was endorsing his opinion on whether or not he wanted to give vaccines to this certain demographic or not. So I think what's happening is the same problem that most journalists have, right? I think the Twitter tech platform after 2016, I guess, or I don't know when it happened. Was it Donald Trump that broke them, or I don't know what exactly broke the world, that we live in this weird place where suddenly, there's this group of folks. There's these public health professionals, an elite class of folks that sit in God knows where, that are very, very interested in making sure that we the people only hear one consensus opinion. And it's like, science has never been like this. I mean, especially science is not like this. I mean, forget about the politics of other things that are very controversial, but my goodness, science has been all about like flip-flopping between widely between things. And how the heck can you have tech platforms supported by some credentialed person saying, no, this is the truth? And not only, and it's okay, say that this is the truth, this is why I think this is the truth, but they've gone further and they've kind of employed the Twitter tech platforms. Not employed, that's the wrong word. They've leaned on the Twitter tech platform.
Pressured them,
pressured them. They've leaned on the social media platforms to help them in this in this pursuit of of greater good. I mean, the Alex Berenson story is fascinating, right? Where Alex Berenson was, regarded as a misinformation person, and it seemed like there was a lot of conversations in government about the fact that we have to get around this whole misinformation thing so that we can get the public on board with whatever we want them to get on board with. And so it wasn't just Twitter acting on its own, because there's all sorts of conversations that Alex Berenson has now put out showing that Twitter was actually okay with what he was saying, and they were okay with there being a discussion about whatever he was talking about. But it wasn't until, folks like Andy Slavitt and other unnamed people in government who had meetings with Twitter to say, hey, this guy is something we have to do with. And then suddenly, X number of months later, Alex Berenson is permanently suspended from Twitter. So I think there's this nexus of, establishment, regime folks, journalists, who are all working, in unison to try to, tell people what the consensus is. I mean, maybe they feel good about it. Maybe they think that it's some higher calling that they're kind of responding to, but it's certainly not healthy.
Bill says, you dangled a shiny bauble in front of me. Who knew blindfolded duck catching was a thing? And there were so many videos of it. I'm gonna have to pull it up just to make your point. Well, to go to your question about what was it that broke us, obviously I think you can fall into several different camps and how intentional you think it was, like how pre-planned, I guess, some of this stuff was. But big picture for me, where I noticed it, and really one of the main reasons that I even started doing this stuff on my podcast, because I was just doing Airstream renovation. I mean, I got fired from my state job. I left television news and was shooting wildfire videos for the Department of Natural Resources. And they fired me over talking to people like you. Like, they would never, they told me if I wanted to keep my job, I couldn't talk to any doctors who in any way undermined their vaccine policy, and I refused to comply, so I even lost my job. But back in the day, I was just doing Airstream renovation. I still have my job. I'd be living big, and I started to get really concerned because I was noticing that the New York Times, for instance, I was noticing what the New York Times was saying publicly in other outlets. But for instance, their headline in 2016 was, we have to do journalism differently because Trump is challenging our rules of objectivity. And it's just like this very grave danger. So we just have to do journalism differently because of the danger. And then that kind of bled into like the next danger and the next danger. And because the news outlets had kind of shifted due to what they felt like, or they were telling the public was this extreme danger, it kind of opened the door for people, I think, over time with this change blindness. It happens insidiously, it's slow. And so you're like just started to accept activist journalism in a different way than maybe you would have, say, 10 years ago, because we'd been teed up to believe that journalists have to do things differently. They have to silence people and censor people. They have to go after the misinformation agents because it's just such a danger. Like, we wouldn't have to if the danger wasn't so bad, but this danger is really, really bad. So yes, I do think that for whatever reason that they were publicly saying that in 2016, Trump was one. Then I think COVID was the next thing. I don't know. Well, election misinformation became the next thing. So there's just new things now popping up all the time. And I think if you can convince people that it's a unique danger, then you're much more able to slip past them that you need to do things uniquely as a journalist or a censor or whatever it is that you say it is. I just don't know how long the public's going to buy the unique danger thing. I mean, how many unique dangers can you have before people say, okay, I've survived all these unique dangers. Like, can we go back to being able to talk? I just don't know. But I do think it started back then.
But it's incredible. It's incredible that we're in a place where there are journalists and there are social media platforms and folks in government that would actively censor cardiologists, like reasonable cardiologists. Like, I'm board certified. I went to a U.S. I went to medical school. Trained anyway, reasonably trained, and they want to censor valid discussions, right now, and it's a bad place, I think.
Well, right, and I mean, you're talking about how like you're a practicing physician, and the standard at this point, because really the other than I think two videos or one or two videos, one maybe. Yeah, I mean minimal because I've been suspended many times. Somehow I'm still here, but I've been suspended from YouTube several times. Just had my last suspension last week. For those of you watching on YouTube who didn't know that, I made it back in thanks to some of the bigger YouTubers I know that raged a war for me on Twitter. But doctors are the only ones who have gotten me suspended, really. I think one time, like I was saying, I quoted NBC and CNN and I got suspended, but they let me back in. But other than that, it's just been doctors. And so it's very clear that you can be a licensed practicing physician in the United States who has literally the power to hold somebody's like life in their hands. I mean, you could, you know what I mean? You're telling them you should consider this treatment, or I'm going to do this surgery or whatever. So you can do that, but you can't talk online. I mean, that is just the weirdest thing ever, that you could have physical relationship with humans legally in the United States and be recommending a certain treatment or talking to them about information that with which they're going to make these very important decisions. You can do that, but you can't talk publicly online. That's so weird to me, because you would think you'd be more concerned about the former.
Right. And that actually undermines what their ultimate goal is. If the ultimate goal is for people to be confident in say vaccines, right? Then you want the public to feel like, look, there's a robust conversation that's happening. There's a vigorous conversation that's happening about this, and that there are safeguards in place where, you know, folks that are dissenters for whatever it is have a voice. That voice is heard, and then you have a debate about it, and then based on that debate, then you decide one thing or the other. And I think it's better to have real consensus as opposed to have manufactured consensus. And again, this is entirely political and entirely related to COVID. I mean, I wrote a Substack on the smallpox vaccine cardiac injury experience, right? And I mean, I mean, that whole thing played out, and you didn't hear a single word in the public press, and nobody really knows about it. But the original smallpox vaccine that existed in the 1970s in the U.S., it's called the Dryvax vaccine. When they started giving it out, it was associated to the military. What happened in the smallpox vaccine? Sorry, a little segue. The smallpox vaccine program ended. It ended in the early 1970s or something like that, right? Because smallpox was eradicated, and you don't necessarily want to keep giving some therapeutic that's going to have, even if it has some small problem with it in the population. When smallpox is eradicated, you don't necessarily want to run around continuing to give it, right? I mean, if you gave peanuts to 300 million people, there would be some people would have peanut allergies and have a problem. So same thing. For that reason, the smallpox vaccine program ended. And then when 9/11 happened, and then there was this threat of bioterrorism that, somebody had one of the weapons of mass destruction was that somebody had smallpox that they were going to release into the United States or release to the military out there, then that would be a problem. So what happened was that they restarted the smallpox vaccine campaign, except they didn't give it to everyone. They gave it to the folks that they felt were highest risk for being exposed to smallpox. And again, are you hearing the principles of what used to be public health, which is, hey, who is the highest risk, and why don't we gear therapeutics, because all therapeutics have some side effect profile. Let's gear therapeutics to the group that makes the most sense. That literally was.
It's a basic cost benefit analysis. You're saying.
Yeah, right. And we've never done this one size fits all thing constantly. We've always carefully tried to do this, in part because we don't want it to blow up in our faces. So they gave it to everyone in the military, right? And guess what? When they gave the Dryvax vaccine to everyone in the military, there was a surprisingly high rate of myocarditis that was seen with the Dryvax vaccine. And so then over time, they've come up with two different vaccines since, ACAM 2000 and now what's given now for monkeypox, which is the Jynneos vaccine. Though they came up with those things. And by the way, because of the experience, because of the studies that were done that showed myocarditis rates were surprisingly high after the initial versions of the smallpox vaccine, the FDA made Jynneos, the maker of Jynneos, which is some German company, I think, do studies where they checked cardiac markers of injury after giving the vaccine to see how active this thing was when it came to the heart. And guess what? The Jynneos vaccine, in about 7,000 patients, in a trial of 7,000 patients, was seen to be much less cardiac activity, not zero, but much less cardiac activity. And that's partly why now when you go to get a monkeypox, if you're in a high risk group that needs a monkeypox vaccine, that's why you get the Jynneos vaccine. And so, I mean, it just makes the whole, so there's this iterative process where you learn as you go, and things get safer. And oh, by the way, the public then has greater trust in you. All we've done for the last 2 years by doing all this nutty stuff about manufacturing consensus and shutting down voices is only undermine the public's faith in doctors, in institutions, and oh, by the way, vaccine campaigns. And why would we want to do that? It's like, I think the people in charge are really, I can't. It's unbelievable. I have no idea how exactly this has happened.
Yeah, well, and I was just like looking at YouTube's policy, for instance, about, because people are saying in the chat that they've changed their terms of service, but they have on some topics like masks, and I think you can question severity, like rates of death or whatever related to COVID, which you could not even discuss those scientific papers. Right. For a long time. Like, you couldn't talk, I'm not even going to say it, but you know what I mean? Like, people were having debates about closing down schools, for instance, and kids. And so what's the rate of COVID fatality among kids? Would it be worth it to kick all the kids out and do Zoom learning, or should we keep them in school? Those were debates you couldn't have on YouTube because you could not question severity, and you couldn't have these cost benefit questions. They just didn't let you. But they still say things like, well, you can't say anything about the COVID-19 vaccinations that contradict expert consensus from local health authorities or the WHO. And this is the thing that really gets me, is this local health authorities. I mean, what does that even mean? You're a local health authority. You work in Philadelphia. You're a cardiologist. Yeah. So what does that mean to see? They make it so vague that you can't, you get stuck on it. They could catch you for anything. So, I mean, I don't know. It just, I think, or the WHO, right? And I also think it's weird that it's the WHO. I guess that's because YouTube's a global thing versus the CDC. That's why they use the WHO. But it's just one of those things where, like, they really keep it so general, they could really get you for anything. So on that note, I want to let people know that you can go to your Substack if they want to read your stuff. So it's just anishkokamd.substack.com. Yep. You're also on Twitter at Anish_Koka. You can follow him on Twitter when he's not suspended. And we're going to go over to locals and take some questions real fast before you go. And I appreciate everybody who's watching on YouTube. You can keep watching live on ROKFIN or Rumble. I hope this video survives on YouTube. If it doesn't, that's why you should be going over to locals. Really, locals is one of the best places to be, because that's where I post right away. Hey, I'm suspended, so this is what's going on. And we are doing on my other channel, my Off-Gridish Living channel, we're doing a gender reveal for Dr. Koka. I'm having a baby next month. So anyway, yeah. So if you want to participate, go to my other channel. The links are in the description, and we're taking audience guesses. There will be prizes. What will the prizes be? I have no idea. It will be worth showing up. I don't know, but it will be fun. So we'll go see you over there and see you on the